nurturing talent and fostering an environment of excellence in education. Our mission is to equip you with the knowledge and skills that will not only prepare you for a successful career in law, but also empower you to make a meaningful impact in the world. GIPS is affiliated with Guru Gobind Singh International University, Delhi, and is approved by the All India Council for Technical Education, AICTE, Ministry of HRD, Government of India for technical courses, and the Bar Council of India for law courses. The institute conducts various courses, namely MBA, BBA, and MBA Integrated, BBA General, Integrated BBA-LLB Honours, Integrated BA-LLB Honours, and LLM. GIPS has been graded A by the National Assessment and Accreditation Council in its third cycle. As one of the National Capital's leading business schools, GIPS brings together people, cultures, and ideas from around the corner to change lives and to transform organizations. In an age characterized by rapid technological advancements and shifting global paradigms, the ability to integrate diverse disciplines has become essential for sustainable success. The International Conference on Exploring Synergies serves as a platform to delve into the intricate relationships between law, management, and multidisciplinary proceedings, aimed at addressing contemporary challenges faced by organizations and society. This conference unites leading experts, scholars, and practitioners from various fields to examine how collaborative efforts across disciplines can foster innovation, enhance legal frameworks, and create effective management strategies. Together, we will explore the synergies that can drive organizational excellence and contribute to a more sustainable future. The keynote speaker and the session chair of our law track is Dr. Kavita Solanki. Ma'am is professor in University School of Law and Legal Studies, Guru Gobind Singh International University, Dwarka, since January 2006. Prior to joining here, she was teaching in Maharishi Udayanand University, MDU, Rohtak, Haryana. She is an alumna of MDU Rohtak Department of Law. On a deputation basis, Dr. Solanki was selected as a reader at BPSMB Kanpur Karan Sonipat in 2009 to 10. She has specialization in environmental law, law of contract, and family law, environmental law, and teaches labor law as well. Dr. Solanki is a good academician and researcher. She has numerous research articles and publications in reputed law journals to her credit. She has had the honor of being a session chair and guest speaker in many reputed institutes. She has worked on doctrinal and empirical work in several university-sanctioned projects. Some of those are generic medicine awareness, mindset of people about generic medicine, social legal problems of domestic helpers, labor codes, and challenges. She was a member of projects sanctioned by the Ministry of Law and Justice. Dr. Solanki has participated and presented papers in several national and international conferences and symposiums in India, as well in foreign countries like Canada, USA, Boston, Mauritius, Germany, Berlin, and UK. In the year 2017, she was awarded the Best Presentation Award in Germany by Bassett Organization. She had provided her contribution in her department committees and university level committees. Ma'am has more than 20 years of experience in teaching courses in both undergraduate and postgraduate levels. She has supervised more than 60 dissertations at LLB and LLM level. 4 PhD scholars have been awarded their respective PhD under supervision of Ma'am. She had been a panelist on Code on Social Security in 2018, which was organized by National Law University, Delhi, and BB Institute of Labour under the Ministry of Law and Employment. We welcome you, ma'am. We also have with us our session coordinators, Professor Dr. Ravikant Gupta and Dr. Neelam Singh Nam. Now, I would like to request Professor Dr. Ravikant Gupta to give a green welcome to our guest. We are highly honored to have you with us today, ma'am. Before we begin, I would like to lay down the SOPs for online presentation. All the presenters must adhere to the time allocated for their presentations. Each participant will be given a total of 8 minutes, which includes 2 minutes for question or answer for their presentation. The participants should ensure a stable internet connection and they should use the share screen feature during the test to confirm proper display of slides. Choose a quiet and well-lit space for the presentation. Mute your microphone upon entry to avoid any disruptions. Follow the session moderator's instructions for your turn to present. Stick to the time limit, that is total 8 minutes, which includes 2 minutes for question and answer. Respond to questions. Ms. Mannat, are you there? Yes, you are audible.
IP and fashion evolution from traditional to digital and beyond. Starting off, 14 focus there, the luxury brand owner. Fashion is not something that exists in dresses only. Fashion is in the sky, in the street. Fashion has to do with ideas, the way we live. And what is happening? The craftsmanship has undergone a profound transformation with the advent of digital technologies. This evolution has not only altered how fashion is created, distributed and consumed, but also has redefined the role of IP in safeguarding the industry's core assets. IP laws encompassing trademarks, copyrights, design, protection, patents and geographical indications, naming the few, remains central to protecting the economic and cultural values of fashion, but it now faces new challenges in the digital era. The hypothesis of our paper is, as the fashion industry involves significant investments in reputation, creativity and monetary value, intangible assets such as design and craftsmanship must be treated as intellectual property and be protected by the appropriate legal framework. The current inequities in the protection have led to the exploitation of artisans, counterfeit goods and diminished creative innovation, necessitating stronger legal recognition and enforcement. Starting off with the research objectives. The major objectives were revolving around the methodological challenges in evaluating the counterfeiting and exploitation of unskilled craftsmanship and the impact of machine-made cookie cartoons designs on the creativity and innovation within the fashion industry. Moving forward, we also investigated the technological challenges posed by counterfeiting, including emerging issues like digital piracy, 3D printing, and the most applicable strategies for mitigating their impact on fashion industry. Proceeding further, IP, the evolving framework. The application of IP to fashion is essential for preserving creativity, innovation, and brand integrity. Historically, fashion was considered as an informal art form, leaving unvulnerable to imitation and practice. Proceeding further, trademark, the IP which builds the brand identity and defending exclusivity. Trademarks are a cornerstone of IP protection in fashion. They enable brands to create distinctive identities through logos, be it the iconic trademarks of LV, Monogram, Chanel's interlocking species, or Nike's swoosh, which are more than mere identities. They embody brand reputation, quality, and consumer trust. Additionally, trademark protection extends the overall look and feel of products, such as Tiffany Co's distinctive blue logo, ensuring comprehensive protection for brand identity in both physical and digital markets. Copyright. Fashion is inherently artistic and copyright law plays a vital role in protecting this claim. Further, design offers a robust legal safeguard for the aesthetic aspects of fashion. Registered trade designs ensure that the visual appeal of products like the iconic Tommy Skelling's bag or Sabyasachi's bridal lehenga are protected from unauthorized reproduction. GIs are essential for protecting cultural and artisanal heritage embedded in fashion. Products like Kanjivaram sari, Pashmina shawl benefit from GI protection. Patents. The role of patents in fashion, though less prominent than other forms of IP, is increasingly important as technology and fashion intersect. Innovations like wearable technology, new fabric compositions such as water-resistant, eco-friendly material, production processes are protected through patents. As industry embraces sustainability and functionality, patents have become essential in securing these technological advances. For example, patents are granted for functional innovations in garments such as temperature regulating, fire resistant fabrics. So, trade secrets. Trade secrets also play a crucial role in protecting competitive business strategies within fashion, such as proprietary production techniques or supply secrets to shorten its production cycle and respond quickly to the market trends. Fourth, counterfeiting. Counterfeiting remains one of the most significant threats in the fashion industry, especially with the rise of e-commerce and social media platforms. The speed and reach of online marketplace have made it easier for counterfeiters to distribute fake goods, leading to brand dilution and consumer mistrust. Digital and technology-based environments. The digital transformation of fashion has revolutionized both the creation and consumption of fashion. As brand expands into the virtual realm, IP law must adapt to protect these new forms of creativity. Citing some of the examples like Tiffany and Co's NFT, the emergence of non-fungible tokens represent the next frontier in IP protection for fashion. Tiffany and Co's, for instance, which merge digital collectibles with physical luxury jewelry, is a prime example of how brands are leveraging blockchain technology to create authenticated digital assets. Fourth, the case study. Myntra's algorithm. The use of AI through its algorithm demonstrates how data-driven insights can enhance fashion design. This software predicts consumer preferences and generates bestseller designs in a fraction of time, drastically reducing the traditional design cycle. Pertaining to the issue of counterfeiting and piracy, blockchain technology offers a solution for providing a tamper-proof ledger for tracking the authenticity of fashion items. Brands like Gucci, LV have begun to safeguard both physical and digital goods, including NFTs. The adoption of blockchain and other technology solutions signals a new era in fight against piracy, where digital verification and traceability becomes essential tools for enforcing IP. Concluding our paper, the evolution of fashion from traditional craftsmanship to digital innovation has made IT law more critical than ever. As the industry embraces AI, blockchain, NFTs, and other technologies, the need for adaptive legal frameworks becomes paramount. While traditional IP tools such as trademark, copyright, signing protection, patents continues to protect physical goods, new legal mechanisms are required to address the complexities introduced by digital advances. To sustain creativity and innovation in fashion, IP law must evolve in tandem with the industry's digital transformation. This includes stronger protection for virtual fashion, clear guidance for NFTs, comprehensive strategies to combat digital counterfeiting. By doing so, designers and brands can confidently navigate the future of fashion, where both physical and digital creations are safeguarded under a cohesive IP framework. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am. It was a lovely presentation. Any questions, ma'am? Right.
Good morning to everyone. So my question is here before you, Manat. Manat, are you PhD scholar?
Ma'am, I'm currently pursuing LLM.
Okay. So yes, very good effort has been made by you. So when we are talking about IPR and fashion, see, this is very good. Number one is you have to be, if you are thinking for this topic, so because the fashion industry is such a broad thing, you have to be very clear. You are dealing with garment, you are dealing with bags, you are dealing with shoes. So, I mean, on which issue you are dealing. And after that, when we talk about, because into your research, because you have mentioned it into your presentation, so your limitation has to be here. You must have to indicate your limitation, like particular sector only. And when we talk about Myntra, because you have mentioned here the Myntra, we are having so many online platforms. Not only the Myntra, so because they are other online platforms, they are also using the artificial intelligence, blockchains, and consumer preference will automatically they would be depicting. So you can take these online resources for this. So my suggestion to you is only just confine your study. Like you have discussed LV, you have discussed Gucci. We don't know, you're talking about the footwear, we're talking about the bags, we're talking about the garments. So you have to be very clear about it. Otherwise, if you're thinking to do the research into this area, otherwise there would be confusion. Okay? The rest is very good effort has been required. Thank you.
Thank you. I will have surely keep this into my consideration. Thank you for guidance.
So this is my suggestion to you. Yes, anyone?
Thank you
so much, ma'am. Next we have Ms. Prerna Tiwari. She will be presenting her paper on the topic Role of OTR in Resolving Environmental Issues and Sustainable Development with specific reference to India. Ms. Prerna Tiwari, are you here? Alright, she's not there with us online. Moving on, next we have Ms. Dhyana Dinesh. She will be presenting her paper titled The Need for a Paradigm Shift of Men from Bread Earner to Caretaker. Ma'am, please come. Dinesh, I will be discussing the topic The Need for a Paradigm Shift of Men from Bread Earner to Caretaker. Does equality and equity in labor restrictions in India? The answer is no. Beyond maternity leave, there is something called paternity leave and parental leave, and this has to be explored by Indian legislation. The paternity leave, which means the leave assigned to father following or around the childbirth, and it can be termed as paternity leave. But that word childbirth doesn't mean confined to childbirth only. It also extends to the word adoption. The parental leave, which is granted to fathers and mothers after the termination of their paternal and maternal leave, to take care of their newborn child for a certain time, whilst giving some degree of security and remuneration. How does that paid parental leave impact upon family? Yes, the availability of leave allows the parents to take care of their newborn, and that one, the increased infant health will also be reflected. That increased infant health, which means physical as well as mental health of the child. Child has to be upbringed well. That's why. And the maternal recovery and well-being. After the childbirth, a mother will be on an emotional roller coaster and as well as so much physical scars. She has some time to recover from all this. So the paid parental leave will help her to recover from that, and it will promote gender equality. Let's look upon the global movement. The rise of parental leave. Hungary was the first country which introduced a parental leave scheme on 1967, and by Sweden on 1974. Then following up, Italy introduced its parental leave policy. Then after, Norway on 1977. Norway is the first country to offer non-transferable leave to fathers. By 1980s, Denmark, France, Greece and Portugal introduced their parental leave policies, and Western Germany and Belgium on 1985 and 1989. The Netherlands, US and Australia also took this global trend during around the 1990s. There will be some kind of variations in their parental leave according to country, based on duration, eligibility, pay structure, flexibility and sharing. ICSR, ICCPR, these are the International Bill of Human Rights. They have they also promote gender equality and work-life balance. They does not explicitly speak about paternal leave and parental leave policy, but they speak that through their articles. Example, the article 23 and 25 of UDHR. The importance of paternity leave. The shared responsibility to tackle, break the traditional gender stereotypes, and by that there will be an improved work-life balance, and also it will enhance gender equality. The need for promoting paternal leave. The need promotes a fair income, security in workplace, and social protection for families. The says about the social protection for families. We have to protect our families through the paternity leave also. Just giving paternity leave only we can't reach the ultimate aim of labor legislation. The ultimate aim of labor legislation is always gender equality. So to attain the gender equality, while giving maternity leave, in my personal experience also, there is a law firm which doesn't allow any women, because they say that sometimes women may get pregnant and after that they will take leave. So we will lack our profit. So that's why the paternity leave is also necessary, and parental leave.
So I think when we talk about, other than this Human Development Index countries, we are on a top ranking, and where we are saying that, like, we are having some rank like 163 some rank, India is standing there. But when we see into this direction, we are having the maternity benefit act, and it has been amended. And later on, when it has been amended, we have incorporated the we were talking about the adoptions, and we were talking about a female they can visit the crèche, and so many good point has been highlighted. But when we are talking about these provisions of the ILO, we are talking the decent work and the security measures, because this is not the way to, it can be where the developed country they can take care of this point. But it means, if we are talking about the decent work, it means what kind of work we are giving it to our workers, whether we are providing them the manual scanning work, or when we are talking about the decent life, it means we are saying what kind of wages has to be provided to the workers, where they can take care of their family if they are not in a position to avail the paternity leave. So how a bread earner can take care of the family by providing the social security means. So this is because India is doing great into that direction, because we are moving into the digitalized age, and into I think we are going into a good direction, because when we see that after this time the benefit has to be given, if the husband and wife they are the one thing to one is availing the benefit of the maternity leave, so we can do the justice with the child. So there is yes. Of course, we promote the daddy's leave, because European countries, this is yes, we are giving the daddy's leave. But in India, we used to say Arjun अपनी माँ के नाम से जाना जाता था. Okay, you are the two generations. So we used to call ऐसे, because when we see our mythology, so we are reaching to that. Yes, we are agree with this motion. Of course, we want to take care. Actually, we want to do something by which we can preserve the marriage. We can take care of the marriage. So we can save the marriages. So yes, good attempt has been done by you. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much, ma'am. The presentation as well as the discussion was truly enriching. Next up, we have Mr. M. Bhupathi and Dr. Sangeeta Sriram representing their paper titled Incorporation of Climate Sensitive Framework Within Insolvency Laws in India.
Having us here, I hope the moderator, the chair, and the other participants are able to hear me clearly.
Yes, you are clearly audible.
Thank you so much. If the admin can please give me permission to share the slides.
Yes, very good. Done.
Right. A very good morning to everyone. I am Dr. Sangeeta Sriram, along with my co-author Bhupati M, who is my student, are presenting this paper on incorporation of a climate-sensitive framework within the insolvency laws in India. We are from the Central University of Tamil Nadu. Corporate insolvency in India has taken a lot of time to evolve. At present, it is being dealt under the IBC, or the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code of 2016. This code has replaced all the existing insolvency laws, and even though it's completely being dealt by IBC since 2016. This incorporation has hugely helped us improve our ease of doing business standing. However, the code has set limitations. The code is based entirely on criteria. Once a company defaults, the control of the company shifts into the hand but the financial creditors. The aim is that these financial creditors will reorganize the company, way that the company can continue even despite the insolvency. Now, while this is a great idea on paper, there are some activities at national level which we are going to be talking about. Claims are of several. There are obligations such as fees, fines, penalties, like the Air Act, Water Act.
Ma'am, your voice is breaking a lot.
Yes. My voice is breaking, you're having a signal issue.
Yeah, ma'am, your voice is breaking.
See if I can move the rest of the engine. Just give me 5 seconds. Is this better? Is my signal better?
Yeah, this is better now.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'll just repeat what I was talking about environmental claims.
Yes.
Environmental claims are under various legislation. We have environmental obligations such as fees, fines and penalties under various environmental legislation like the Air Act, Water Act, etc. We also have liability under the Public Liability Insurance Act, wherein any company which is involved in hazardous substances has to take a prior insurance, and liabilities come under that act as well. Other than that, claims can arise out of writ court order when there is a fundamental right violation of the nature of environmental rights, or under the NGT, which is a dedicated forum just to deal with environmental claims. Now, environmental claimants may be both the government and the individuals. One, I'm providing this classification will make sense in a minute. Why is the question of dealing with environmental claims under the insolvency framework in India important? We all know that climate change is the biggest issue that we are facing right now. And as climate change becomes a bigger reality, the risk of higher environmental claims becomes more and more apparent. One, there are physical risks. We have been seeing what is happening in Los Angeles. The fire is spreading like crazy. Companies are going to suffer huge losses. There are going to be huge claims arising because of the loss, something that nobody can control. The other is transitional risk. As we transition from traditional coal-based or carbon-based economy towards a greener economy, there has to be significant investments that have to be made, which can also become burdensome economically for companies. Now, not all environmental claims are quantified, or they may also be unliquidated. Some are quantified, some are not. Unliquidated claims under the IBC are treated as contingent claims, and when they are done so, only a nominal amount is assigned. Now, to understand this a little better, I'll just give you a very brief overview of how IBC works. IBC works in two stages. The first is the corporate insolvency restructuring process, wherein under the CIRP, Creditors who have given money to the company or who have dues from the company are classified into threefold: financial creditors, operational creditors, and debt holders. If you are an environmental claimant and you have a decree against the company, you will be classified as a decree holder. If you have a decree and there is a litigation that is pending, you're completely stuck because during the CIRP process, a moratorium is imposed, no new litigation can be started, and all existing litigation comes to a halt. It is in these circumstances that all environmental claimants who do not have a decree are classified as contingent claimants, and a nominal value of as low as 1 rupee may also be assigned to your claim, which means that whether you are a government or an individual who has suffered because of an environmental obligation failure of the company, the chances that you will get the compensation is next to impossible. If the restructuring process fails, the company goes into liquidation. Under the liquidation, the aim of liquidation is to maximize the asset value. Obviously, when you're trying to maximize the asset value, settling environmental claims is in fact a conflicting agenda and therefore is not prioritized. Under the liquidation scheme in section 53 of IBC, you have a waterfall mechanism wherein anyone who has dues from the company is classified into three: secured creditors, unsecured creditors, and remaining debts and dues. All environmental claimants come under the remaining debts and dues, which is again a very, very low priority. So what we understand from all this is that IBC does not have an inbuilt mechanism to deal with environmental claims, and that's where the whole concept of pre-insolvency becomes very relevant. Now there are yes?
Ma'am, please adhere to the time limit and conclude.
Yeah, just give me 1 minute more and I will summarize.
Sure, ma'am.
There are two additional problems that we face. One, IBC has a non-obstante clause which overrides all the existing legislation or any other solution. And second, haircuts under IBC are very, very high. The financial creditors who get top priority, they themselves do not get more than 25% of their claims on an average. So the chances that environmental claimants will get any meaningful payment is absolutely impossible. Now I'm going to skip the existing suggestions that have been made so far due to paucity of time. I will conclude with what our recommendation of development, which requires an immediate intervention within the IBC framework and not beyond it because of the non-obstante clause. This intervention has to be both at the CIRP stage and liquidation. It is not possible for you and me to sit and decide which is the best framework, which is why I recommend, me and my co-author, we recommend that the Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change is included in these deliberations, and some sort of a mandatory environmental audit is conducted even before the companies go into an insolvency process. And during the insolvency process, there is an environmental liability fund that is built in to address any future environmental claims that might arise. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, ma'am. The presentation was very informative. Any questions, ma'am?
Yes, Dr.
Sorry, ma'am, I didn't hear the last part.
Yes, Dr. Sangeeta. So, you have selected a very good topic. So, it's very relevant when we talk about at the time of, Viksit Bharat or contemporary time. So, we want to ask one question only. So, you discussed ease of doing business, right? So, when we are talking about ease of doing business, we are having 10 parameters for this when we are talking about the ease of doing business. And your insolvency and the bankruptcy code is very, very important. So, can you tell us how it is related with the ease of doing business and how this code has helped India to get a very good rank? Now we are having the 63rd rank, and it's a good achievement. So, can you explain this? Thank you.
Definitely, ma'am. Thank you so much for the question. Ease of doing business assesses, it's a World Bank assessment on how each country enables business in their country, in their economy. So not just about single window entry, but an important part is ease of exit. How easily can I shut down my business if I want and leave the economy? That is where the insolvency code becomes very relevant. Before the coming into picture of IBC, we were doing very poorly on ease of exit. And now, because of the IBC's coming, ease of exit score has improved overall helping our ease of doing business ranking. Now, what has to be noted is that since 2020, the World Bank has stopped issuing ease of doing business ranking and is now planning to replace it with what is known as the business enabling environment, where environmental sustainability during insolvency claims has now become a new criteria. So the importance of our topic of green insolvency takes even more importance. Thank you, ma'am. I hope I have answered your question.
Yes, thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Next up, we have Ms. Sapna Bansal. She will be presenting the paper titled Sundarbans versus Smart Cities, Balancing the Beam. Ms. Sapna Bansal.
Give me a moment, ma'am. Just a moment.
Sure.
Am I audible?
Yes, you are audible. Please switch on your camera also.
Yeah, I could not hear anything from that side, so I was like skeptical.
No, you are completely audible.
Okay, ma'am. Good morning. Ma'am, because I have logged in from mobile, is it possible if can I share it from mobile slides?
Yes, you can.
With I will share the
Okay, ma'am. Please do. Thank you so much. So, my co-author, Dr. Sapna Bansal, will be sharing the slide. I will be presenting it.
Okay, alright. We'll make her the presenter. Sapna Bansal ma'am is already the presenter, so yeah.
And put it in slide mode.
Is this visible?
It's visible, but let's put it in the slide mode, ma'am. I can see the whole units on the side of the slides.
One minute. Give me a Is this visible?
Yes, it's visible. Okay, I will be presenting more. Okay, so our topic is deforestation of mangrove forests in Sundarbans versus smart cities, balancing the beam. So in this particular topic, what we were wanting to do was that we were wanting to present that how does the whole government and everything is wanting a smart cities. This is the buzzword right now. But when we are aiming for smart cities, sometimes it actually backfires on us, because by creating a city which is a smart city, we are cutting off many of the natural resources, or we are damaging the natural resources. So we have specifically taken the Sundarbans into effect for this particular topic to see if it is having any kinds of issues on the level of it being polluted, or it being the deforestation.
Ma'am, the PPT is not clearly visible. Can you switch on the slideshow mode?
So it is, ma'am, just click on the slideshow.
I have done that. I think there is a weak network from my side. That's why this is not clearly visible.
Okay. It might not have updated there.
Can you share the entire screen instead of just one PowerPoint presentation?
I have done that.
Who is taking this purpose by conventional therapy should be banned on the basis of conventional therapy is harmful, unethical and outdated, and it should be banned. The initial steps are crucial, but we need a law shall be implemented regarding this, and which shall be also included in the human rights, just to protect dignity and promote equality. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Any questions from anyone? Any others? Can I ask you a question? So you want to end the conversion therapy, but if somebody wants it voluntarily, can you hear? Can you hear us?
Hello?
Yes, sir, can you hear us?
What we are asking is, see, you have not made a distinction between voluntary one and compulsory one. If somebody is pushed into the therapy, that somebody wants to go for the therapy, that should also be stopped.
Well, only forceful conversion therapy should be stopped. If any person voluntarily goes, I think that is fine. There is no problem regarding this. But in case of the minor should be not treated by conversion therapy. After an age like 18 years or even a year, they should be there with their own choice. If they want to go, that's fine. As they do not want to go, that is fine also.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you. Very good presentation you made, and very good topic also. Keep up your good work. Yes. Anyone wants to?
Amulya, I have one question. Can you listen me?
Yes, sir.
Can you tell us a leading case in which transgenders are provided fundamental rights or other rights?
Sir, repeat again the question.
Can you tell us any leading case which provide some rights to the transgender?
Sir, I am not fully. Your voice is not clear to me, sir. Please.
There is nothing in your case in which these rights are given to the transgender.
Sir, I fail to understand your question because there is a lag in the voice.
Well, it's all right. Researchers used to find new facts. So why did you go further?
There is a lag in voice. I will not fully understand what you are asking.
Sir is asking about the landmark case in this area.
Landmark judgment he is asking. If you can tell us the landmark judgment relating to this topic.
Landmark movement.
Yes, sir.
Is this right, sir? Landmark movement.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. In 2009, there was first case in India. There was filed by the 2001 by the NAS Foundation regarding that was in regarding the HIV AIDS. But Supreme Court, Delhi High Court decided that homosexuality is not an offense and decriminalized it. But in 2013, Supreme Court decriminalized again and said that if any government, or any person wants to, the government should make law regarding this, and court appeal is not a matter in this. And after that, in 2018, just 1 second. Another case by in case of the Complex Kumar, it was decriminalized. It was criminalized again, and in case of the Nowadays Singh Jailer, it was decriminalized again, and that is still now that is prevalent in India.
Okay, thank you very much, and nice presentation.
Okay, sir.
Thank you so much, sir, for your impactful presentation. The next presenter is Shikha Bhardwaj, and the topic for her presentation is Peace Activities and Human Rights Ensuring Accountability. Yes, ma'am, it is visible.
Perfect. A very good morning to esteemed members of the dais, campus conveners, and guests. My name is Shikha Bhardwaj, and I'm honored to present my paper titled Peace Activities, Human Rights and Ensuring Accountability. Our world today is vastly different from what it was in the 1990s. Back then, there was no internet, no smartphones, or digital banking systems.
Ma'am, please unmute yourself. You have muted yourself.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
Yes.
Our world today is satellite in one way or the other. The use of satellites has revolutionized almost every aspect of life, from travel, banking to defense and agriculture. This technological leap has fueled a space race not just for scientific discovery, but to monetize space. With the discovery of water and valuable minerals on the moon, space exploration has transitioned into a lucrative venture. Spacefaring nations are now racing to build sustainable operations, even envisioning drones on the moon. Private companies too are playing a pivotal role in the expansion, investing heavily in satellite and celestial resource exploration.
These aspects. The GST Council is from certain viewpoint it is criticized, but from certain positive viewpoint it is appreciated as a true fiscal federal institution wherein the center and the state come together to decide on how the GST should be levied, on what products and what services it should be levied, what should be the rate of it, how the collection method should be. And basically everything related to GST is being decided by center and state together. That's why it is regarded as one of the best and truest form of fiscal federal institution. Also it is unique because no other nation has a GST council-like institution. There are equivalents of institutions in other federal systems where they look into the one or the other aspect of GST, but India has created a unique institution here. This GST allows simultaneous taxing power to center and state, which can be an avenue of competition between the states, but it has been carved up by creating GST Council as an avenue of cooperative federalism, and it has been time and again recommended by Supreme Court, and it has been recommended by other experts and scholars and individual research studies as well, that the GST Council, being the unique character it has, holding the unique character that it has, it would work in the best possible manner only if it goes for a cooperative attitude or cooperative approach. So far, we have not seen any issues between the center and the state. However, to address that, there are yes.
Please conclude in a minute.
Yes, just in a minute I'll conclude. So it has created the uniformity seen in the tax administration mechanism. Now, in front of you we have the revenue composition that was prevalent prior to GST's introduction and then post GST's introduction. There are still some products and services stabilizing. So we are at a very early stage to actually conclude as to what has been the actual impact of GST. It would take, we will have to go for a long-term implication study as well. But there are certain plus points of introduction of GST that it has definitely simplified the indirect taxation. It has unified the tax administration through GST network. It is a consensus-based decision-making system through GST Council, wherein so far we have not seen any point of contradiction or any point of contestation between the center and state. There is a pure decision-making done.
Yes,
Ruchira. There is that
see time. Yes, Ruchira. Yes.
Yes.
Please, we must have adhere the time limit because there's so many presenters we are having into this thing. So my question is for you. You are talking about because when we were started the journey of the GST in our country. So Canada was the role model, right? Where we were talking about the central GST and the state GST. So how this GST system is, what we are saying the indirect taxes, how they are helpful for the middle class group? Because normally we are facing the challenges because if we see the screen.
From not allowing your impure meat to sit on your sofa, to blaming the woman for her own assault, to mocking that God for painting his nails to not giving houses on rent to those who pray 5 times a day. Humans are sinking to inhumane new lows. I think by now it must have been evident that it is a 5-letter word which serves as this disturbing difference between our constitutional ideals and our social reality. And the word is power. Where there is power, there is privilege. Where there is privilege, there is prejudice. Where there is prejudice, there is marginalization. The topic of my research is constitutional protections and human rights of marginalized communities, examining safeguards and persistent challenges in India. But first, we need to understand what marginalization is. Marginalization is when people or
every employee feels safe, valued and empowered. A place which thrives on fairness and inclusivity. This value is not just an ideal. This is the cornerstone of the workplaces in India and the labour laws in India. Good afternoon everyone, this is Rupaina Jha and my topic for the presentation is labour law implications in the workplace of India. So first of all we talk about the labour laws. What are labour laws and why do we need labour laws? Labour laws in India, they have served as the backbone for workplace governance, ensuring proper treatment for each employee, compliance with maintenance and compliance with the employers. It comprises a vast range of issues associated with workplace functionalities, including the safety, discrimination measures, employment contract wages, and collective bargaining. Also, the development of clear guidelines and protection has enabled labour laws to safeguard the rights of workers while maintaining business operations by remaining within legal and ethical boundaries. So the labour laws in India are important for the workers, for the employers, so that an inclusive and a safe environment can be formed, can be protected, and we as a society can have a safe workplace, and not only a safe workplace, but also a safe and inclusive economy. Within the workplace for every employee, the major provisions which include regulated working hours, minimum wage, standard mandated benefits for the employees. As we all know, India, we have so many various acts and so does labour laws. We have various acts for labour laws. Some to name would be Factories Act, Minimum Wage Act, Payment of Wages Act, Maternity Benefit Acts, Provident Fund Act, and many more. I cannot recall at the moment. And therefore, that tells us about what we as a society demand, or what the makers of the constitution or the lawmakers of India wanted at the time. The very first act was the Industrial Dispute Act, which came in 1947. We can say just around the time of independence, and that tells us that since the beginning, as an independent society, we wanted a society which values our workers. We wanted a workplace where everyone feels valued, safe, inclusive, where we do not have discrimination. And therefore, based on these ideals, we have progressed into this economy and this far along way became one of them. I would like to say that labour laws protect workers' rights. They emphasize the promotion of safety and workplace fairness. It is important to acknowledge labour law reform to address modern challenges of the workforce. For example, globalization and new work trends. Also, you must have heard recently the chairman of L&T, S.N. Subramanian, gave a statement where he said that individuals should focus on 90-hour work week, which received significant backlash, and that shows that we as a society need to balance the ambitious organizations, and also that there should be a balance between these organizations and the health of employees, and that as a society we should focus on progress and the individuals hand in hand. Thank you. I did it under Nishtha.
a theoretical paper, right? Yes. But what I feel, it is mixture of everything. Law. Labor law is not a small one. First you are going to wages act, then you are going to minimum compensation act, then you are going to human rights. So it is not focusing on the topics or on the law itself. It would be rather good that you have to find out 2 or 3 laws, how it is being implemented. For example, how we saw the implementation of the law. Implementation of law is always determined by the adjudicating authority. So there is no single law. This is second paper which I am seeing here. You are in 5A course, BA in 5A. So you have long to go, but legal provision as well as case law that are backbone of the law research, right? So we have to justify. There are lots of cases there and other case laws are there that should be mentioned in your PPT. I don't know you have mentioned in your paper or not, but if it is not mentioned, please mention the case law as well as legal provision. For example, we are saying that minimum wages are not being computed in unorganized sector. Okay, we are not taking the organized sector, unorganized sector. So how we will justify it? Because we did not go through the empirical study. It is only either tribunal or the Supreme Court of India who have given lots of judgment on that minimum wages should be ensured and labor law should be ensured. Labor law is an umbrella. We have to find out 1 or 2. You have mentioned safety law as well. You have, I think so, the insurance law itself. So it is mixture of the
that's because I actually haven't studied labor law yet. So I wanted to include everything because my
take the law, you have human rights in 5th semester, right? So that might be the better subject. Okay, it's nice try, but in future when you are writing this law research paper, these 2 are the best ones which you have to keep in mind. In third one in your international perspective itself. So these 3 should be there in your law research paper, because mostly we do the doctrine research. Okay, there are various person or various scholar students who is going for the empirical study to justify your statement. Because first I have seen that labor law. Labor law means you have taken the whole box and you have to extract everything. Otherwise, it's nice try, you put up and keep practicing.
Thank you, Aparna. Next we have Nikki Man and Mudit.
Is it Aparna Shah?
Aparna Shah.
I am Udit Jain with my friend Nikki Man and Raveen Nan, and we have done with a collaborative effort this research paper, that is the impact of GST and FTAs on export-import, a global perspective. So this research paper is all about GST and FTA, in which we have analyzed the impact of GST implementation and FTAs for different countries and for India, of course. And there we have analyzed what was the impact of GST implementation, that it boosted the export imports for our country as well as other countries, and how after having free trade agreements with different countries, there is a tariff reduction and overall boost of export imports. And so this is basically all about, and we all know about GST. So GST is a comprehensive tax system which was applied in India in 2017, and which was also applied in several countries in different years. Like for Germany it was 1999. So it has, and we have analyzed that it has impacted very well in the export and export systems of every country, and with the collaborative effort of FTAs. after the implementation of free trade agreements between the countries, we have saw that there is a tariff reduction which have enhanced the smooth conduction of export-import in different countries and for India, and it has also reduced double taxation effect after GST. It has also reduced tariffs. It has also reduced the compliance part for the several businesses. So this is the logical flow of process. So first we are discussing about global trade system of countries that is in the world. Then we have introduced GST, how after the implementation of GST there is a reduction in cost, simplification of a taxation process in India and several countries, remove of cascading effect and availability of ITC also. Then we have discussed the role of FTAs, how after free trade agreement there is a tariff reduction, smooth conduction, liberalization, globalization in export-import. And then we have analyzed the combination integration of GST and FTA overall impact with the help of graphs and charts that we will discuss in later on stages and analysis part as well. Then we have identified the challenges, that there are challenges too. If it has benefited, a challenge analysis can also be done. So this is our certain limitations. Thank you. And this is
Mudit. So you are appearing simultaneously in two research papers. That's great thing. Who did who contributed more out of two because of your guide? Now come to the slide. I will give just suggestion because of if you are doing at this level this much work, I must appreciate. Just come at this 2020 wala slide. First one? No, the next one. The next one. Yes. Okay. See, whenever we write about export and import, 19 to 20. This was the COVID period. So you must include because of there was a slowdown. So that's why it came. Right? So that must be included. That is one point. 2017 we implemented a GST and there was a free trade agreement also. Now again in 2023 there is a slight decline because of you are doing theoretical research. Okay? So try to align it with the theoretical reasons which exist. If you are simply rewriting like this, then it's not it's that much effective. So you should be ready with the reason why moving up, why coming down. Okay? So there are valid reasons behind it. Though statistically we are not doing this. Now, how it is affecting like this before and after. So there is a one simple tool because of your data points are less. Okay? Because of we are having, if we will be having something, suppose we are having some half yearly data or something. And what you can do before a particular point, 2017-20, what you will do, there is a simple tool which is called analysis of variance. You will insert in Excel and then you can do simple analysis. Okay, so that is also there. So for a quantitative, try to learn just only simple statistical tool. But I must appreciate you people have done this much work. And I must appreciate your faculty guide as well. Okay, good work, nice work.
I am seeing good researcher in you. I must say. So keep it up. But otherwise, all the management and statistical part has been covered.
Thank you so much for the wonderful presentation. Now I invite Shrishti Arora to present the topic on evolving threats in the digital era.
Everyone, my name is Shrishti Arora and I have done my research under the guidance of Ms. Prachi Sharma. So the digital age has transformed how we live, work and connect, but it has also brought new challenges in the form of cyber threats. Cyber threats is not a very recent challenge that we are facing. It has been going on for a very long time, since the time that we have evolved in the technological era. From ransomware attacks to the data breaches and phishing scams, cybercrime is on the rise, exploiting vulnerabilities in advanced technologies like AI, Internet of Things and cryptocurrency. India, as a rapidly digitizing nation, faces significant risk with billions lost to cybercrime each year. India, only from January 2024 to May 2024, has lost around 1800 crores in cyber scams. Despite advancement, gaps in cyber laws and protection leaves individuals, businesses and critical infrastructures vulnerable, highlighting the urgent need for stronger safeguards and awareness to protect our digital future. That's why I selected this topic, because even though we have all the laws, even though everyone knows everything about it, still why we are not able to prevent it, that's what I wanted to show in my research. So the main problem is that we have an IT Act that was introduced in 2000. It was also amended in 2008. Still, it's in its retrospective era. With the advancement in the technology, the laws that we have are still not advanced yet. Like for example, still now, IT Act does not consider the IP address of any site as a technological evidence. Even though IP address helps an individual to find out where the exact computer was working from, what was the geographical location, so it should be included as a potent investigational data.
Such as healthcare, where patenting can lead to high drug price and restricted access to life-saving medication. Developing countries in particular face challenges in accessing affordable medicines due to patent protections that prevent generics from entering the market. Moreover, excessive control over IP, intellectual property, can hinder knowledge sharing and collaboration. Open source models, for example, have been shown to foster innovation by allowing creators to share their work freely. The imposition of strength IPR may restrict collaborative environment as creator may unwilling to share their work for fear of losing control over it, being unable to profit from them. Let's just conclude to conclusion. Intellectual property rights play a significant role in fostering innovations by providing creators with the incentive to develop new product technologies and ideas. However, the overextension of these rights can have detrimental effects, including monopolization, restricted access to knowledge, and displeased competition. Striking a balance between protection and accessibility is crucial to ensuring the IPR continues to promote innovation while minimizing their negative consequences.
So, Ashi, I think you're.
Thank you.
Yes, you're addressing. Oh, I'm so sorry. So, I think you are addressing the problem of pharmaceutical sector, right? And
yes.
And you are talking about the generic medicine as well. So, can you tell me, if you're talking about why we say these are the branded medicine, what's the difference between the branded medicine and the cheap medicine and the low-cost medicine? What's the difference between them?
Branded medicine and cheap medicine.
And cheap cost medicine, not cheap medicine, it's a cheap cost medicine.
Yeah, cheap cost medicine.
What's the difference between them?
Basically, branded medicine, let me start with the definition of branded medicine. These are medicine developed, manufactured and marketed by a pharmaceutical company under a specific brand. एक brand के साथ उसको launch किया जाता है, and then branded medicine are generally expensive due to research, development, marketing and patent cost. For example, Crocin, a branded version of paracetamol.
What is the duration for the patent has been given to the branded medicine? For how long they can use this brand? Because once this time will be expired, then after that the generic medicine they will come and they can use the salt, they can manufacture the drugs, right? So what is this time period has been given it to the branded medicine?
Time period.
For how long they can use it? Cipla ने बनाया तो Cipla का ही नाम है ना? If we are talking about, we are having so many multi-vitamins, so many things. So they are using their patent for how long they can use it. When the generic medicine will come into picture, then they can start with this manufacturing process.
Generally, 20 years for in patent, 20 years from the filing date of the patent application. 18.
Data number one, this is my suggestion to you. If it is the your PhD topic, you are doing the PhD from SGT?
Yes, ma'am.
because I would be meeting you there then. Because the thing is, yes, because the thing is, you should not write your topic, because the PhD topic is, once you've decided the topic, your half of the research has been done. Because IPR rise and the innovation is such a broad thing. You must have to confine your title subsequently. And the second is, because when we talk about, Uddhav say, like we are talking, you were talking about generic medicine. We are having the Pradhan Mantri Jan Aushadhi Kendra. Because we are having so many Jan Aushadhi Kendra, we are having the Jan Aushadhi medicine stamp lagi hui hai na. So like crocin and the paracetamol ka dono ka difference and the rate of difference. Because we cannot afford for the branded medicine. So like, what's the difference? What is the harm in using the generic medicine? Huh? Do we have any regulation for this? Generic medicine. If we are coming up with any kind of the scheme, the Pradhan Mantri is saying Pradhan Mantri Jan Aushadhi Kendra we are having. कोई औषधि है? हाँ बच्चा?
Ma'am,
whether any kind of the advisory has been issued to the private practitioners, they will prescribe what kind of the medicine? Do we have this kind of things?
Yes, ma'am, we have those things.
Medical Council of India में
Sorry.
Oh, okay. ठीक है बेटे, you can work on this, है ना? हाँ, this is a very important things क्योंकि वो this is the advisor, you can look into this, हाँ?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you. For the protecting corporate governance as well as the CB's guidelines. So this paper also highlights the legal compliances and international best practice. So what is the first we define what is the corporate governance. So first basically the corporate governance refers to the system and process by which the companies are controlled and directed, ensuring the accountability and transparency in their operation. The operation basically is operated by the shareholders, directors and the employee of the company, and they are playing very important role operating the company. This is the main structure, whole structure they are operating, and while they are operating this company, there should be need of accountability and transparency. And the investor is the pillar of market. Not even the market, but basically focus on the security market. They are investing their money in security market and their money need to be protected. And this protection,
Can you please conclude in 1 or 2
sorry?
Ma'am, can you please conclude in 1 or 2 minutes?
Yes, sure. The SEBI guidelines provided a very strong and effective manner they are protecting the investors. But nowadays we see that there are so many challenges investors they are facing because there are so many corporates occurring. That is the big lacuna because we are failure of corporate governance. So somewhere somehow we are lacking this problem because of the various corporate fraud as well as the SEBI facing the market complexity, fraudulent schemes like Ponzi scheme, cheat fund schemes, and the very deceitful investment. They are giving, we know that there are so much financial literacy occurring in this nowadays, and we are dealing with the cyber technology. We are also facing the cyber security measures. So there is a major risk for the investor. They are investing money in the market. They are not much aware about the cyber and cyber crime as well as. And one of the bigger complexities related to the cooperation between the various agencies. Because SEBI is operating their separate authority as well as if you see the Bank of India, they are also separate authority. There are lack of coordination between their agencies. This is the main lack of paper, and I have